Death. For most people, it is an end. But for some, it is the only door opening to immortality. Date: 30 BC. Location: Alexandria. The most magnificent city of the ancient world is buried in silence. Roman legions are breaking down the gates. The world's most powerful army is coming to take the life of a single woman. But she is too proud to let her enemies taste the pleasure of victory. She is the last queen of Egypt. She is the shadow of the goddess Isis on earth, Cleopatra. And the man who once ruled half of Rome but lost everything for the sake of his love is not by her side. Mark Antony is long dead. This story is not a simple romance. It was an attempt by two superpowers to unite and conquer the world. The story of an empire built on passion and destroyed by blood. If you are ready, let us return to where it all began, to that destiny, to Tarsus. Rome was in chaos. Julius Caesar had been killed on the Senate floor with 23 stab wounds. The heart of the Republic had stopped, giving way to a power struggle. There was a man who avenged Caesar and was a candidate to become the new master of Rome, Mark Antony. Antony was not a philosopher or a politician. He was a man of the battlefields. His soldiers worshipped him. He was handsome, extravagant, and loved drink and revelry. He was believed to be a descendant of Hercules. But Antony had a big problem. To hold on to power, he needed money, and lots of it. And at that time, money had only one address: the East, Egypt. In the East, things were different. Cleopatra was left alone after Caesar's death. She was watching to see who would emerge victorious from this civil war in Rome, because she had to protect her throne, her country, and most importantly, her son, Caesarion. Antony wanted Egypt's wealth. Cleopatra wanted Rome's sword. This would be the most dangerous relationship of mutual interest history had ever seen. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in the lands of modern-day Turkey. This was a general summoning a queen to his feet, but Antony did not yet know who he was dancing with. Antony waited by the riverbank. The queen did not come. He summoned her again. Still, she did not come. Cleopatra knew very well that the best way to attract a man's attention was not to give him what he wanted immediately. After days of waiting, a silhouette appeared on the horizon. And that scene, which historians would recount for centuries, took place. What came down the Cydnus River was not a ship. It was a floating palace. Its sails were dyed in Tyrian purple, which was more valuable than gold at the time. Its oars were silver and dipped in and out of the water to the accompaniment of flutes and lyres. Before they even saw the ship, they smelled it. Cleopatra had soaked the sails in such intense perfumes that the wind heralded her arrival to the people. Antony's soldiers, the public, even the guards, everyone ran to the riverbank, mesmerized. Antony was left alone in the square. Cleopatra was reclining under a gold-embroidered canopy on the deck. She had dressed herself like the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. The maids around her were disguised as sea nymphs. This was not a visit of surrender. This was a visit from a goddess to a mortal. Antony was invited to dinner on the ship that evening. The moment the tough, rough, and war-weary Roman general stepped onto the ship, he became a prisoner of the magical world Cleopatra had created. Candlelights, mirrors, dishes he had never tasted before, and a woman shining with intelligence before him. That night, the fate of Rome changed. Antony had not just found an ally, he had found the woman to whom he would surrender his soul. Most sources write that Antony fell only for Cleopatra's body, her youth, or her legendary beauty. But this is a great misconception, because Mark Antony had been with countless beautiful women throughout his life. What truly struck him was Cleopatra's mind. That night in Tarsus, under the influence of wine and incense, Antony found not just a woman before him, but an intellectual. Think about it. Roman women generally occupied themselves with housework and weaving. Political discussions were forbidden. But Cleopatra, she was a genius. The historian Plutarch tells us this. Cleopatra's voice was like a multi-stringed instrument. She could speak in any language, in any tone she desired. Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic. She spoke exactly 9 languages like a native. While talking to Antony, she would dive into Roman politics, emerge through Greek philosophy, and discuss military strategies. Antony was a rough soldier. His life had been spent in tents. Cleopatra, however, was opening the doors of a world he never knew. She told him about the stars, quoted Plato, and sometimes made him burst into laughter by making the crudest soldier jokes. That night, Antony felt incomplete beside Cleopatra. And when a man finds the woman who completes him, even empires become mere details. This was the true reason for the departure to Alexandria. Antony was going not just to a lover, but to a mentor. But this dream would awaken his enemies in Rome. After that magical night in Tarsus, Mark Antony could no longer think of Rome's harsh discipline, Senate debates, and gray walls. His mind, heart, and soul were in the world Cleopatra promised. And the expected happened. Antony cast aside his post and responsibilities, following the queen to Alexandria, to Egypt. That winter, the winter between 41 and 40 BC, was a period even historians struggle to find words to describe. While politicians in Rome were digging each other's graves, time had stopped in Alexandria. Antony and Cleopatra were not living merely as two lovers. They had turned life into a work of art. They even gave themselves a name, a Mimitoboyo, that is, the Club of Inimitable Livers. The rule of this club was simple. Every day had to be more magnificent, more extravagant, and more unforgettable than the one before. Within the palace walls, days passed with feasts and nights with games. Sometimes they would dress in commoners' clothes and blend into the streets of Alexandria, mixing with the people, playing pranks, knocking on doors, and running away. Antony had taken off his armor of the invincible Roman general and had essentially turned into a love-struck young lad. Cleopatra had become a mother, a lover, and a best friend to him. Whatever Antony loved, Cleopatra became that. If he drank, she drank. If he gambled, she gambled. If he went hunting, she jumped on her horse and went with him. So, when the palace doors closed, how did this couple, declared demigods, actually live? Let us freeze time for a moment and take a look at the back streets of Alexandria. Midnight. A man and a woman dressed in slave clothes are running through the street, laughing. They go under windows to scare people. They get into verbal arguments with drunks in bars. Yes, these were Antony and Cleopatra. They would disguise themselves and mingle with the public to escape the suffocating protocol of the palace. This was the only way Antony could escape being a Roman general and the heavy weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Cleopatra had given him back his childhood. Let me tell you that famous fishing story. One day, Antony went fishing to show off to Cleopatra. But luck was not on his side. He couldn't catch a single fish. Not wanting to be humiliated before the queen, he ordered his divers, "Swim from below and attach pre-caught fish to the end of my hook." Every time Antony pulled the line, there was a big fish on the end. He would turn to the queen and look with pride. But Cleopatra, she was aware of everything. She didn't make a sound that night. But the next day, she secretly sent her own diver into the water. When Antony pulled the line with great excitement, hanging on the end was not a live fish, but a salted, dried herring from the Black Sea. The whole boat erupted in laughter. Antony was stunned. Cleopatra approached him, kissed him, and spoke those words that went down in history. "Leave the fishing rod, my general. Small fish are the business of helpless people like us. Your prey is cities, kingdoms, and continents." That is what their love was like. Intimate enough to make fun of each other, yet ambitious enough to want the world. According to legend, during one of these contests of luxury, Antony bet that a more expensive meal than this cannot be prepared. Cleopatra just smiled. She removed the massive pearl earring from her ear, worth a kingdom. She dropped it into the goblet of vinegar before her. When the pearl dissolved in the acid, she drank that vinegar in one gulp. Antony understood once again in that moment that this woman had no limits. However, every dream has a morning, and for Antony, the time to wake up came with very bitter news. Messengers arriving from Rome heralded disaster. Antony's wife, Fulvia, had started a civil war in Italy and lost. On the eastern borders, the Parthian Empire was about to attack. The real world had grabbed Antony by the collar. Antony had to make a choice. Either stay in Alexandria and be buried in history with his love, or return to Rome and preserve his power. Antony chose power. When he said goodbye to Cleopatra, the queen was pregnant. She was carrying Antony's twins. But Antony left without looking back. And this departure was not a simple business trip. This was the beginning of a separation that would last for years. When he returned to Rome, it wasn't just war awaiting Antony. His political partner and greatest rival, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, offered him a proposal he could not refuse to strengthen his bond with Antony. "Marry my sister." Octavia was the exact opposite of Cleopatra, a traditional, obedient, virtuous, silent Roman woman. To preserve his political power, Antony erased his passionate love in Egypt with a single stroke and married Octavia. When the news reached Alexandria, Cleopatra had given birth to her twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. The father of her children was not by her side. What she heard was that Antony was playing the role of an exemplary family man in Rome. When Antony returned to Rome and married Octavia, everyone thought he had straightened out. He was now a model Roman. He lived in a luxurious house in Athens, listened to philosophy, and attended receptions with his wife. But his close circle saw that emptiness in Antony's eyes. Octavia was a perfect wife. She was beautiful, loyal, virtuous. She never raised her voice, never made fun of Antony. But his close circle saw that emptiness in Antony's eyes. And that was exactly the problem. Octavia was like a stagnant lake. Antony missed the storm. It is said that at night he would go out to the balcony of his house in Athens and look east. What was Cleopatra doing in Alexandria at that time? She was not mourning. She was working. While strengthening the Egyptian economy, she was also tracking Antony's every move through her spies. She never wrote him letters begging, "Come back." That would not befit a queen. The letters she sent were clever moves. Sometimes a perfume bottle, sometimes a rare pearl. Just small gifts to remind him of herself, to trigger Antony's senses. Antony was drowning in holy Roman virtues. One day, when he slammed his wine goblet onto the table, those around him understood. This man's body was in Greece, but his soul had already returned to the Nile River. Historians call this the breakdown of the political alliance, but we know the truth. This was the unbearable hunger an addict feels for his drug. Antony missed not the sun of Egypt, but Cleopatra's chaos. And when he decided to go to Antioch, he was actually returning home, not to war. Could there be a greater devastation for a woman, a greater insult for a queen? But Cleopatra was not a woman to weep and whine. She knew how to wait. She knew that Antony would one day get tired of that boring, gray life in Rome, that virtuous but passionless marriage. Because a man who had once tasted that inimitable life could never warm up on the cold marbles of Rome. And she was right. Exactly 3.5 years passed. Antony was suffocating in Rome. He had to go on a campaign to the east against the Parthians, but everyone knew that his real campaign was to his heart. When he set off for the east with his ships, he turned his route to Antioch. And there he sent that letter, "Come." Cleopatra was going not to ask for an accounting of 3.5 years, betrayal and loneliness, but to rebuild the future. That meeting in Antioch was perhaps not as romantic as their first encounter, but it was much more decisive. The game was over. Both knew what they wanted. Antony wanted to be free from the yoke of Rome. And Cleopatra, an empire for her children. There, in Antioch, they made one of the most daring decisions in history. They would challenge Rome. They would establish a new world order, covering not just Egypt, but the entire known East. However, there was something they forgot. There was a cold, calculating, and ruthless eye watching them in Rome. Octavian. He would never forgive this betrayal that trampled on his sister's honor. War bells were no longer heard from afar, but from very close by. This is the breaking point of the story. Love and fun are over. Swords are drawn. That daring meeting in Antioch created an earthquake effect in Rome. But the last straw was that magnificent ceremony held in Alexandria. Historians call this the Donations of Alexandria. Antony and Cleopatra appeared before the public on golden thrones. Antony distributed the lands conquered by Rome to his own children and Cleopatra as gifts. A Roman general was giving lands won by Rome with blood to a foreign queen. Screams of rage echoed in the Roman Senate. Octavian used this opportunity that fell into his hands like a political genius. He did not declare war directly on Antony, because declaring war on a Roman meant civil war. He declared war on the foreign woman, the sorceress queen of Egypt. The speech he made in the Senate poured the poison of nationalism into the veins of the public. Antony is no longer a Roman. He is a traitor who has lost his mind with a woman's potions and sunk into the narcotic luxury of the East. There was no turning back. Words were finished. The fate of the world would be determined off the western coast of Greece, off Actium. Date September 2nd, 31 BC. The sea was calm. The air was tense. On one side were Antony and Cleopatra's massive ships, resembling castles and carrying hundreds of soldiers. On the other, Octavian's light, fast, and deadly fleet. Antony's plan was simple: to break through the enemy line with his powerful ships. But when the battle began, things did not go as expected. The sea began to be stained red with arrows, spears, and burning balls of tar. Right in the middle of the battle, within that chaos that lasted for hours, an event occurred that no one expected, and that historians still cannot fully explain to this day. Cleopatra's flagship, the famous Antonia, suddenly unfurled its sails. Right from the center of the battle, instead of breaking through enemy lines, it headed for the open sea, fleeing the fight, along with 60 Egyptian ships in its wake. The queen was fleeing. Perhaps it was a strategy, perhaps panic, or perhaps she had seen that Antony would lose. Whatever the reason, the Egyptian fleet caught the wind and began to sail away. It was at that moment that Mark Antony made the biggest mistake of his life. He did the one thing a general should never do. His soldiers were dying for him. His ships were burning for him. But when he saw those purple sails shrinking on the horizon, it was as if his will was drained from his body. He left the battlefield, his army, his honor, everything behind. He boarded a small ship and chased after his queen, his love. Left leaderless, the fleet was bewildered. Their general had abandoned them in the lap of the enemy. They surrendered shortly after. It was not just ships that sank at Actium that day. Antony's reputation, his Roman dream, and his hopes for the future were buried in the deep waters of the Aegean. When Antony reached Cleopatra's ship, he did not say a single word. He did not go to the queen. He went to the very end of the ship, to the prow. He held his head in his hands, and for days, without speaking, he was no longer the lion of Rome. He was a broken man who had sacrificed everything for the sake of his love and gained only shame in return. When they returned to Alexandria, the city still believed them victorious, but there was a deathly silence in the palace corridors. They knew Octavian was coming, and this time there would be no peace treaties, no marriage proposals. This time the end was coming. While Antony and Cleopatra awaited the inevitable end, they disbanded the old Club of Inimitable Livers. In its place, they founded a new club. Its name was as tragic as they were: the Club of Those Who Will Die Together. The parties continued, the wine flowed like water again, but this time it was not for celebration, but to forget the fear while waiting for death. And finally, Octavian's legions arrived at the gates of Alexandria. The curtain was about to fall. August 30 DC. In the scorching heat of Alexandria, Antony's world had turned to ice. Octavian had entered the city, and legions had surrounded the palace. Antony tried to fight one last time, but it was futile. His own cavalry, his own ships, switched sides before his very eyes and saluted Octavian. He was now completely alone. Just then, news arriving from the palace broke Antony's last bit of resistance. The news was this: Cleopatra is dead. She has killed herself. This was actually false news Cleopatra had spread to protect herself, or perhaps a moment of panic. We will never know. But Antony believed it. He removed his armor. He drew his sword and ordered his faithful slave, Eros, kill me. The slave could not bring himself to do it. Instead, he plunged the sword into himself and committed suicide. Antony looked at his faithful friend lying on the ground and said, "You have shown me the way, Eros. before plunging the sword into his own stomach. However, this was a tragedy, and the tragedy was not yet over. The blow was fatal, but it did not kill him immediately. As Antony lay on the ground covered in blood, a second messenger came running from the palace. "The queen lives! She awaits you in the mausoleum." Upon learning that the love of his life was alive, Antony gathered his last remaining strength and said, "Take me to her." History's most sorrowful reunion took place in that tomb chamber. Antony breathed his last in Cleopatra's arms, surrounded by her scent and the sound of her voice. The Lion of Rome died in the arms of Egypt. Cleopatra was now truly alone, but for her it was not over yet. Octavian wanted the queen alive. Why? Not to forgive her, but to chain her and parade her through the streets of Rome, displaying her like a trophy in his triumphal procession. Cleopatra would not be a slave chained in Rome. She was descended from kings. Octavian was keeping her imprisoned in a room. They had removed sharp instruments and poisons from her, but Cleopatra's intellect was sharper than Rome's swords. A basket of figs. The guards allowed a peasant bringing food to the queen to enter. Inside the basket, beneath those sweet figs, a deadly passenger was hidden. An Egyptian cobra, or perhaps a potent poison hidden in her hairpin. Though legends differ, the result was the same. When Octavian's men burst into the room, they froze at the scene before them. Cleopatra lay upon a golden bed, dressed in her most magnificent royal robes. She wore the crown of the pharaohs on her head. It was as if she were sleeping. Her handmaiden Iris lay dead at her feet. Her other handmaiden, Charmian, was trying to straighten her queen's crown as she took her last breath. One of the Roman soldiers shouted in anger, "Is this right, Charmian?" Charmian raised her head with her last remaining strength and gave that answer which went down in history. "Yes, Roman, this is the most fitting deed for a queen descended from honorable kings." And she collapsed. Octavian won. He became the sole ruler of Rome, its first emperor. But Cleopatra did not give him that final victory he desired. He could not chain her. He could not capture her soul. Octavian was forced to respect this great love. He allowed Antony and Cleopatra to be buried side by side. Today, somewhere beneath the waters of Alexandria, they lie side by side in that tomb lost to earthquakes and time. Empires have fallen, borders have changed, languages have vanished, but their story is still told even thousands of years later, because they were the ones who were willing to burn the world down rather than rule it.